4 years of torn muscles, snapped tools, and sacrificed weekends to a plot of clay that repaid every hour of labor with a carpet of chickweed so thick you couldn't find the soil beneath it. That is not a gardening failure. That is what happens when you follow the only method anyone ever taught you, where you break your body open every March just to grow a tomato, and the earth punishes you for it by June. The system you inherited, the dig, amend, plant fight cycle. It was never actually designed to feed you. It was designed to keep you buying, keep you exhausted, to keep you believing that food from your own ground requires suffering that feels proportional to the harvest. And the proof isn't abstract. It is that pulled muscle in your lower back, the one that sidelines you for 3 straight weeks. The proof is 2 broken garden forks rusting against the shed wall. The proof is standing at the end of a Sunday in March, hands raw, spine locked, staring at a leveled bed you're genuinely proud of, only to watch it erupt into a weed nursery 14 days later, because every stroke of that fork dragged dormant seeds up into the light and gave them exactly the conditions they needed to bury your work alive. You didn't fail at gardening, you succeeded perfectly at activating a biological trap. Every time a spade turns compacted ground, it shatters fungal networks that took literal years to knit themselves together. It drags anaerobic bacteria into ultraviolet light that kills them in minutes. It exposes the architecture, the actual living infrastructure, the system that makes nutrients available to your roots, and it demolishes that architecture in a single afternoon of honest effort. And then the next season you wonder why the carrots are stunted, why the brassicas bolt early, why you need another bag of fertilizer just to coax a basic crop out of ground you've amended for 5 years. The answer isn't that you're lazy, ignorant, or cursed with bad soil. The answer is you've been performing surgery on a patient every spring and then wondering why it never actually heals. This is the loop almost every backyard grower lives inside. Without naming it, spring pain, summer war, autumn exhaustion, winter guilt. Reasonable harvests, but never abundance, never consistency, never the feeling that the garden is working with you, instead of just constantly extracting from you. And the worst part is that the loop feels earned, feels virtuous, because effort is supposed to equal reward, right? And if the reward is thin, then surely the answer is more effort, more digging, more turning, more of the exact action that destroyed the biology you desperately needed in the first place. But that assumption is completely wrong. It is not slightly wrong or partially wrong. It is structurally, fundamentally wrong. And the moment you see it clearly, the entire logic collapses. It rebuilds itself around a principle. So simple it sounds like a lie. Stop disturbing the system that already knows how to feed you. Here is the thing nobody selling you a bag of fertilizer will ever explain. Every spring you rip that soil open, you weren't preparing a bed. You were performing surgery on a living organism without anesthesia. And then, wondering why it bled out by July. That fork driving through the earth was severing a massive network, an actual web of fungal threads called mycelium, that spent months building connections between root systems, transporting phosphorus, shuttling water, communicating chemical warnings from one plant to the next one. Pass with a spade, and those threads are gone, not damaged, destroyed, and the organisms that depended on that architecture, the bacteria, colonies, the protozoa grazing on them and releasing nitrogen, releasing it in plant-available form right at the root zone. All of that collapses into biological silence within days of disturbance. So what happens next is perfectly predictable and perfectly profitable for someone who isn't you. The soil can't feed your plants anymore because you killed the feeding system. Now you need a bag, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. Those 3 numbers printed on every fertilizer label like a nutritional promise. But those salts don't rebuild biology, they bypass it. They force feed the plant while the soil beneath stays completely dead, stays dependent, stays requiring another bag next month, and another one the month after that. You haven't built fertility, you've built a subscription service with your own labor as the delivery mechanism. And the so-called nutrient-rich compost in those plastic sacks, the ones that cost $8 each and smell like a factory, those are completely sterilized, heat treated, and biologically empty. You're laying dead material on dead ground and expecting life to emerge. It will not, it cannot. It is just a transaction. System was designed to keep you purchasing, not to keep you fed. The herbicides are the exact same lie wearing different clothes. You spray to kill the weeds. Your digging created in the first place, and the chemical does not discriminate. It poisons the fungal network in the top 3 inches of soil, the exact layer where 90% of nutrient exchange happens. Then the soil compacts, because there are no longer living roots and hyphae, holding its structure open. For you, then you're told you need to dig again to break up the compaction. And the cycle restarts, perfectly closed, perfectly expensive, perfectly exhausting. This isn't a gardening method. It is a trap dressed in the language of productivity. Every tool, every product, every piece of advice that begins with clearing the ground and ends with adding synthetic inputs to the soil exists to keep you locked inside a broken system. A system that cannot function without your money and your pain. The soil already knew how to grow food before any of this was invented, doing it for 400 million years without a single bag of anything. What it needed from you was not more intervention. It needed you to stop destroying the one thing that made the system run. The exact thing that made the whole operation run for free. And once you understand that, you see the con for what it is. The question stops being what to add and becomes what to stop killing. The answer reshapes everything, starting with how you think about your soil and what it actually requires underneath those first transplants. 6 years without buying a single bag of fertilizer. That isn't a boast, it is a consequence. And the mechanism behind it is elegantly simple. So simple that the fact we ever forgot it should embarrass us. Somewhere beneath the surface of a bean plant right now, a negotiation is happening that predates every chemical factory ever built. Bacteria detect the chemical signals leaking from a legume root, they swim toward it and physically enter the root hair. The plant then builds them a house, a small pink nodule, pink on the inside because it is filled with a special molecule, a molecule so close to the hemoglobin in your own blood that under a microscope you could mistake one for the other. Inside that nodule, the bacteria crack atmospheric nitrogen, the same gas that makes up 78% of every breath you take, and convert it into ammonium the plant can eat. The plant feeds the bacteria sugar. The bacteria feed the plant nitrogen. No invoice, no petroleum input, no runoff poisoning the nearest stream. This isn't some fringe permaculture fantasy. This is a biochemical protocol running for roughly 65 million years. It was the primary fertility engine of every agricultural civilization, until we decided a factory in Germany could do it faster. What we lost when we sidelined legumes from rotation was not just a crop. We lost the entire self-renewing nitrogen cycle, the exact cycle that made purchased inputs completely unnecessary. Here is what that looks like in practice at bed scale. You grow broad beans through early spring, peas through midsummer, French beans into autumn, runner beans, overlapping on the same supports, just letting them overlap until the first frost. When each crop finishes, you cut the stem at soil level, and you leave the roots exactly where they are, those nodules, still packed with fixed nitrogen, decompose slowly through winter, releasing their payload directly into the root zone, ready for whatever you decide to plant there next season. The crop that follows a legume bed grows visibly darker, visibly faster, visibly more productive, not because you added anything from a bag, but because the previous occupant already made the deposit. Because the soil always remembers the transaction, and the legume bed itself isn't some sacrificial cover crop, one you tolerate. For the sake of next year, it produces more harvestable food by weight across a full season, more than any other bed in the rotation. Peas, broad beans, runners, French beans, week after week of actual meals, pulled from a bed that is simultaneously manufacturing fertility, the exact fertility your entire system runs on. That is the law we forgot, not a mystical principle, a biological contract written into the genome of every legume species on the planet, waiting for you to simply stop interrupting it. So when you lay out your beds and decide what goes where, the legume bed isn't just another planting choice, it is the engine room everything downstream of it. Every brassica, every root crop, every leafy green that follows in next year's. Rotation draws on the nitrogen that bed banked into the soil, and the bed that sits beside it in the sequence, your alliums and quick salads, benefiting from a different logic, one built around timing rather than chemistry. Here is the thing nobody tells you when you first decide to grow food. The most productive act you'll ever perform in your garden isn't planting. It isn't watering. It isn't weeding. It is not turning soil with a fork until your shoulders ache. It is laying a sheet of cardboard on the ground and walking away. That sounds like laziness. It sounds like neglect. But the results tell a completely different story, because 6 inches of compost piled over flattened cardboard on top of uncleared grass will outperform a double dug bed. It will do it within 1 season, asking nothing of your body, except the willingness to stop interfering. I want you to picture what is actually happening. Beneath that layer, the cardboard blocks every photon of light from reaching the weeds below. Without light, they can't photosynthesize, and without photosynthesis, they starve. Not in a dramatic chemical death the way herbicide works, but in a slow, quiet suffocation that turns their own decomposing bodies into food for the soil organisms gathering at the interface. You didn't pull those weeds. You didn't poison them. You simply denied them the one thing they needed, and the system digested them on your behalf while you were asleep. Above that cardboard, the compost layer is doing something equally strange. It is not just a growing medium for your transplants. It is an invitation, a welcome. Matt rolled out for fungal networks that have been waiting in the surrounding soil, waiting for exactly this kind of undisturbed organic matter. Within weeks, white threads of mycelium begin stitching through that compost, binding particles together, transporting phosphorus and moisture, shuttling it to root tips that have barely begun to push downward. You didn't inoculate anything, you didn't buy a product, you simply stopped disturbing the ground. And the biology that was always there finally had permission to build. The potatoes you push into that compost layer never meet a fork. You place the seed tuber on the surface and cover it, mounding more compost as the stems rise. Their canopy shades out any opportunistic weed, any weed that tries to establish. Above the cardboard line, their roots gently aerate the decomposing layer below, without you ever breaking structure. And when you harvest them in late summer, you aren't digging, you're just pulling back compost with your hands, collecting clean tubers that practically roll right into your basket. 40, 50, 60 pounds of food from a single bed grown in a medium that didn't exist 8 months earlier, on ground you never once turned over. This is the lever, not a tool or a technique you have to master, not a schedule you have to maintain. A single afternoon of laying cardboard and piling compost creates a system. A system that suppresses weeds, builds fertility, feeds fungi, and grows food simultaneously, and it asks less of you with every passing season, because the biology compounds while you rest. The less you intervene, the more the soil accumulates structure, accumulates the life it needs to do your work for you. Once you understand the effort was always the problem, not the solution, the entire logic of how you grow food shifts onto a foundation that doesn't require your suffering to function. Picture the next supply chain fracture. It doesn't matter whether it arrives as a fuel shortage or a port strike, a currency wobble, or another pandemic lockdown. What matters is the scene inside the supermarket exactly 48 hours after the trucks stop rolling. You've seen it before, the empty shelves where the lettuce used to be, the rationed eggs, the wilted cabbage marked up to 3 times its normal price, and the particular look on people's faces when they finally realize that everything they eat depends on a system they don't control, a system they simply cannot influence. That look is the sound of sovereignty being revoked in real time. Now hold that image and contrast it with a different scene, a scene happening on the exact same Tuesday afternoon. Someone walks out their back door, pulls a handful of kale from a bed that has been producing since November. They dig a few parsnips from soil so loose the roots slide out without resistance, and carry a basket of stored onions and beetroot up from a shelf in the garage. No queue, no price shock, no dependency on a logistics network that just collapsed under its own fragility. The difference between those two people isn't talent, acreage, or climate zone. The difference is that one of them built A system months or years earlier. A system that costs less than a single month of grocery delivery, that runs on biological processes rather than diesel, and gets stronger every season instead of demanding more from the person tending it. This is the part that most gardening advice never reaches, because it sounds too large, too political, too dramatic for a simple conversation about compost and cardboard. But the truth is blunt. You aren't just practicing a hobby. When you grow your own food inside a system that regenerates itself, you're withdrawing your dependence from a fragile supply chain, a supply chain that treats your hunger as a market opportunity. Every bed that feeds you in January is a month you can't be leveraged. Every stored root in your cellar is a week you avoid. That line, scanning empty shelves, wondering how it came to this. And the beautiful paradox is that the act itself is quiet. It is an afternoon laying cardboard, a few wheelbarrows of compost spread once a year. It is seeds saved from last season, dropped into soil that already knows how to grow them. There is no heroism in it, no survivalist fantasy, no bunker mentality, just a slow, compounding certainty that your household eats, regardless of what happens. Beyond your fence line, the garden doesn't care about freight costs or trade disputes or quarterly earnings reports. It answers to rain, to fungal networks, to the worms threading carbon deeper every night while you sleep. So the question isn't whether you can afford to build 5 beds on a single weekend for under $100. The question is whether you can afford not to. Knowing what you now know about the system you've been trusting with every meal your family eats, the answer, if you're honest with yourself, has already changed.